We exist to improve the lives of caregivers across Ontario. And when we say caregivers, we're talking about ordinary people who provide physical and emotional support to a family member, partner, friend, or neighbor. And this here will give you an example of what we're all about and how we do what we do. So at the center of all of our work are caregivers. Caregivers inform where we go as an organization, what programs and services that we provide, any types of resources that we develop. We collaborate with them to develop all of this and anything that we offer. So all of our programs, our services, webinars, etc., they are free of charge. We also have a caregiver advisory panel, various working groups, and a feedback platform to ensure that we're on the right track to support caregivers. We have public information that we put out through public awareness campaigns, online, as well as print. We have direct caregiver programs and services, and we do a lot of system outreach and collaboration as well with various partners across the health and community sectors. We also ensure that we are consistently helping other organizations to have caregiver insights and engagement as well. So that way, if they too are providing services, caregivers are heard, their voices are a part of everything that is provided for them. So as I mentioned, we are focusing on the person who's in our community, all those 4 million caregivers we know across Ontario who are providing support to those close to them. This can be for a variety of different illnesses. We support caregivers of any age, and it does not matter what condition that the care recipient has. We do support all caregivers. So this is just to give you a sense of what we're learning. We are fortunate enough to do a spotlight report every single year, and we collect information from caregivers to really get a sense of what's the demographic looking like and how are they feeling about their role, what do they need. So we know that they're from every age group. We've got about 57% that are between the ages of 36 and 65. So as you can imagine, an event like today is quite timely because within those ages, you're in the workforce, you've got a lot of experience behind you, and you're able to add a lot into whatever work that you're doing, right? So balancing both the caregiving need at home as well as your work can be very challenging. We're also seeing younger caregivers come forward more now as well. So about 31% under the age of 35. And it's becoming more evenly split between female and male caregivers. That's been a shift as well. So we've got 54% who are female caregivers and 45% male and 1% identifying as non-binary. And overall, throughout the province, we know 69% of caregivers are reporting that they're employed. So just a bit more information here. Who are people actually caring for? So 82% care for one person, which is usually an older family member, often a parent, and about 1 in 5 are caring for more than one person. So some caregivers are balancing multiple forms of care for multiple people. And we've got 36% who are caring for someone or supporting someone with an age-related condition of some kind. 46% care for the person in their own home, so the caregivers within their home, and they bring someone in to live with them to care for them. 38% go to the care recipient's home. So now that you get a sense of some of the caregiver experiences in our province, who they are, who they're caring for, we want to also touch on the impacts of caregiving. So many of you who already live this every day or who maybe have lived it in the past, you know that there is many different impacts. It could be for time, for finances, your own health and wellness, your physical well-being, your mental well-being, as well as personal relationships. But the one that we're going to focus on most today is the impact on employment and work-life balance. I know work-life balance is thrown around a lot these days, but we do have some key strategies that we can dig into today to see how we can make some changes to ensure that you do hopefully find some more balance between that. Many caregivers too, who we connect with, say that there are times when, even though there's a lot of stress and it's impacting a lot of areas of your life, there can be times when it does feel really rewarding to be a caregiver, especially if, you have a really close relationship with the person that you're caring for and you can be there for them. But also the reality hit when you're having some of those really hard days, or maybe you're looking for support and you just can't find it, right? So this is what we hope to help with today. As I mentioned, we do a spotlight report every year. And the past 2 years, we've been looking at how the pandemic itself has been affecting caregivers. So this gives you a bit of a rundown of what that's looking like between 2020 and 2021. 58% of caregivers this past year have reported that they are feeling completely burnt out. And as you can see, just over 60 are saying that they're really finding caregiving stressful overall. You'll also see some other points here. 20% of caregivers this past year took out a loan or a line of credit to help pay for some of the expenses associated with caregiving. We are seeing these numbers rise over the course of a year as well. And 46% are reporting that they're feeling really lonely and isolated. So this is concerning, and the way that it relates to workplace is that many caregivers have said that they're really anxious about going, if they were able to have more flexibility during the pandemic, they're worried about the flexibility shifting. Those who were, fortunate to be able to work from home throughout the pandemic have said that now they're worried about going back in. They're really anxious about that because of the transmission of COVID-19. And then others have said, I need to be able to leave the home every once in a while. This isn't a place where I can work every single day. So we're seeing some different challenges depending on each person's unique circumstance. But I wanted to make sure to share what they've reported over the past 2 years. I think it's really important to look at the impact of the pandemic as well. So that was all kind of heavy, right? We're talking through a lot of the challenges and some of the unfortunate experiences that caregivers face. But I also want to touch on another piece here, and it's the fact that caregiving experiences provide incredibly valuable skills for people. And as I mentioned, we have a variety of working groups where we've got caregivers working with us to develop a lot of our tools and resources. So one working caregiver named Carrie shared this with us, and we just think it's a really nice glimpse into the benefits of caregiving as well. She shared with us that the life experience that caregiving teaches really builds on your resiliency. It helps to adapt in various work situations, to be flexible, be able to make decisions on the fly sometimes. That can be really incredibly important, and also have that good judgment, right? So looking at a variety of perspectives and be able to make a judgment call when needed. So I always think it's nice to stop and reflect on the fact that this can really enrich our skills and abilities as well when we are a caregiver. So if you yourself right now are balancing both work, maybe you have your own business, maybe you have an employer, and you're balancing that along with a caregiving experience, and you're really starting to feel stressed out, you're not alone. Many caregivers report that they feel like they're juggling 2 full-time jobs at once. What we know across Canada, we've got 35% of the workforce who is caring for someone with a physical or mental health need. That is a very large number of people within our workforce. And so if we're not feeling supported within our workplace or have the resources that we need at home, of course, that's going to make a huge impact on the workforce at large. And we know that almost half of working caregivers do report that they are finding it really stressful. 1 in 3 this past year have been really worried about losing their job because of the stress and the impacts of that. So the number one thing, and we're going to start getting into some key strategies now. So we've got an idea of what the landscape's looking like. Let's get into what we can actually do about it. The number one thing that I always try to remind caregivers about is that, we have to be easy on ourselves because you can't always do it all. We do our best. People who are caregivers usually are very natural within that role. They want to care for others. They tend to put others ahead of themselves. But when you're trying to balance all of this, you really do need to think about who's on your team. What do you need for you as well? So when you're managing that support role, that caregiving role, you have to think about who's going to be on your caregiving team. So who's on your team so you can support the person who needs you. You need to identify where you need support, and then you actually need to find those services, right? And that support. This is all incredibly overwhelming when you're just trying to get through the day. And that's why we're going to talk through some of our key tips and strategies to make all of this happen. So the first part, who is on your support team? This can look different for everyone. It depends who everyone has in their life, what their situation is. Not everyone has a lot of family or friends for various reasons, but usually you can think through who is a part of that natural support system. So natural support could be family, friend, neighbor, maybe someone within a community group or organization that you're a part of that you trust and have become close with. And then we've got our provider side of things. So we're looking at anyone who is a professional that's providing you a support. It could be your pharmacist, your doctor, a nurse, physio, chiropractic care. Like there's so many different providers that we each individually go to, and we have to think about how they can support us in our own health and well-being as well. So between those two, you can start to get a sense of who you've got to back you up, who you've got to help with your own health and well-being. And a lot of caregivers, because they're so busy, they're just trying to get things done, they don't always stop and reflect on, oh, I actually do have some people that I can go to on some hard days, or who I can maybe ask to help back me up. And so this is a really important step in looking at that balancing act. So one of our tools is our Working Caregiving, a Balancing Act toolkit for working caregivers. As I mentioned, this was developed alongside caregivers who are in the workforce. We also worked alongside the Canadian Mental Health Association to develop this resource. And so what we were reflecting on is what are some key areas that we can really bring about to make it more of a process flow. So caregivers can take this and say, okay, this is the process that I can follow within reason, within whatever is going to work for me, and think about all of the steps to taking, okay, I have my support network at home, my personal support network, but now what can I do at work as this all translates through into this part of my life? So these are the 5 steps, and we're going to work through these. And within the toolkit, we have the resources to assist with each of these steps as well. We know it's a lot of work to sit down and think through all of this. And so that's why we have a number of tools to assist in that process. So number 1, you really want to learn about any options that are going to be available to you within your workplace after you do a bit of an assessment within your personal life. What services are available there, and then what do you have at work? You want to assess the options that could actually work for you. What are your gaps? What options are actually going to assist with those gaps? Having a discussion, we're going to get into some tips on that with the employer, whether it's your manager or supervisor, whatever that situation might look like. And then how you can actually start to implement some of these approved changes once you do have the discussion. One thing that I will highlight later again is the fact that even after we find a plan, we work through these steps at work and at home, you always have to stop, review, and reassess, because sometimes the changes that we think would help don't. And that's when we have to go back to the drawing board a little bit and relook at some options. So I'm going to give you some examples of how we can actually do this. So as I mentioned before, every situation is unique. Every person's experience is unique within caregiving. And so you really have to take the time to do your homework to see what is available to me. Are there different financial resources and benefits available through work? Maybe there's days that you didn't even know about that are available to take off to help with caregiving needs. Have you really taken a close look at those human resource policies and benefit packages? Look at the language. Is there anything in there about family needs or support options? And then also looking at any flexible working arrangements or leave options that could be helpful to you. So, of course, the whole idea is to help people balance so they don't have to leave the workforce. But there are times when people may need to leave for a short time just to really get things set up. So there are government programs, grants, other forms of assistance, and ways to protect yourself within your workplace if you do need to take a leave. But all of that needs to be worked out with your employer, and you can kind of look through what those options are to make some decisions for you. So one way to do this, it's one thing just to talk about it, but then when you actually sit down and try to figure all this out, it takes a while and it can be really stressful for caregivers. So this decision aid tool that we've put together really does help you work through all the different ideas and options. So you can go through and say, okay, what's actually available through my employer? and what are some questions that I still have for them. So doing that preparation before you even have the conversation. We went to managers and supervisors across the province and we said, okay, this is what we're trying to do to help working caregivers as someone in a management role or a leadership role of some kind, HR, that type of thing. What are some suggestions and tips that you can give to people when they're ready to come to the table and speak to you? And so this is what they helped us put together. Number one, they said, book a time, really do some of the work ahead of time to think about some potential solutions for yourself in the situation that you're faced with. You really want to get their input, make it clear that you are committed to the workplace, but these are the challenges and here's what I need to happen in order to have a better experience. They also said that you want to bring some notes and ideas with you. You want to follow up in writing after the meeting. So that way there's a nice flow between doing your homework, having the discussion, and then checking in afterwards. And they said sometimes these things could take time. It depends on how far advanced policies and practices are within the particular workplace. So it could take them a little time to work through those policies and see what they can offer you. So patience is key as well. So I mentioned before, so typically what happens is once somebody takes stock of these are what my challenges are, these are the things that I need help with, here's the options at work, and they kind of go to their employer and talk that through to look at solutions. Typically, after a period of time, a solution will come forward that you can hopefully agree upon with your employer. That usually is put in writing. So if it's something like a job share with another coworker, if you're going to have different flexibility options between hours that you're going in, split shifts, maybe you're going to work from home some days, perhaps you're sharing some responsibilities with a coworker, because if you've got to take someone to an appointment every Wednesday when you have some key meetings, maybe that can be shifted around. Just some examples of some of the changes that we've seen. That all has to be in writing, so you have it and they have it, and there's a good understanding between your employer and yourself. That can also help in balancing any shifts in roles between yourself and coworkers. So that's all going to take place. You've got something, in place. After a certain amount of time, you want to stop and you want to reassess, right? So, okay, it's great that we've implemented, but is this actually working? So what's working, what can be improved from both sides, both from the employer's perspective as well as from yours. And then you can decide with your employer, when do we want to do this? Do you want to give it a month? Do you want to give it 3 months? Want to give it 6 months? But there definitely has to be something in calendar to assess this. I'm just going to take a moment to take a look at the chat just to see if there's any questions. Okay, perfect. Okay, so the other side of this, so now we've gone through some of the strategies and a process for working through how you can find better balance at work and alongside your employer. On the other side of this, we've also been assisting the employer group in how they can create a more caregiver inclusive workplace. So I mentioned the guide for caregivers, but we also have a guide that kind of mirrors that for the employers. So it really speaks to human resource professionals, leadership, and people on the management team. And the whole idea in a perfect world would be that the employer knows that they have working caregivers on their staff team. And so the working caregivers have the resource that we talked through and some of those tools. And then the employer has this toolkit where they can also use a variety of tools to help have those supportive conversations, be able to ensure that policies and procedures actually outline how this can affect caregivers. Maybe it's leave options, maybe it's extra caregiving days, whatever that might look like. That's the hope, right, in a perfect world. And that's what we're working towards, to ensure that there's support for both parties as they create a more inclusive workplace. And so we have this guide, we've got the e-learning for employers, and we also do training sessions for employer groups as well as their staff teams. So just to give you a sense of how we're ensuring that we're on both sides of this. And the nice thing about this guide is that we did work with employers across the province to develop it, And again, we partnered with the Canadian Mental Health Association to develop this. So one thing that we really encourage caregivers to do are some more frequent check-ins with themselves. So for instance, today is Thursday, we're nearing the end of the week. That's a nice time to kind of check in and say, okay, how am I actually feeling? If you have a few minutes to stop and just check in. Have you taken any time for yourself this week? And that can look different. Whatever makes you feel like you're taking care of you, whatever brings you a bit of joy. Maybe it's a walk while you listen to a podcast or some music. Maybe it's going for a swim. Maybe it's going to your local community center or local library. Whatever that looks like for you, to have a few moments just for yourself. And I think that's so incredibly important because, as we talked about before, caregivers tend to naturally just really focus on others. And I can't tell you the number of times when I'm speaking with caregivers, sometimes they come through our helpline and, I'm assisting them. And I say, well, what can we do for you? And they stop and they say, I didn't even think about me, right? Because they're just busy setting up support for the person they care for. And so that's the number one thing, is find some time within your day, within your week, to just really get a sense of how you're feeling, how you're doing, and maybe what you can implement just for you. Even attending sessions like today can be helpful as you reflect and hopefully gain some new information or new strategies or resources. So we've got a few more minutes left in our presentation, and we can do some questions afterwards if there are any. But I just wanted to take this opportunity. I know we didn't have a ton of time today, so I really went through some strategies pretty quickly there, but I hope that what we've gained now is a good sense of some of the things that you can actually do as you're balancing both worlds of work and care. But now I also want to focus on what next. So after today, where can I get some help? Where can I get some support, right? So I'm going to go through some of the free information and services that we provide, and then hopefully that helps you take some of this from today and get support when you need it. So I mentioned that we do a lot of public information. We put a lot out there. So we do have our website, we have newsletters and bulletins for care providers, we have our social media. So those are all the different forums that we use. We also do mail out. We put information in newspapers throughout the year. We know that this virtual world that's developed can be really difficult for a lot of people who may not have access to internet or have difficulty getting online. So we do try to ensure that we've got the information out in other methods as well. The number one resource that I hope that, if anything, you take away from today is our helpline. So we have a free 24/7 caregiver helpline. This is available to all caregivers across the province. Our phone is 24/7. The live chat feature, which is on our website, is available Monday to Friday on those specific hours you'll see on the screen. The whole idea is that you can get information and referrals that's going to help you get the support that you need. It can be really trying to do online searches, or even if you're just looking for information across the community, that can be really hard to do. So the whole idea is that our specialists, they ask you some key questions. You tell them about the needs that you have, whether it's for you or the person that you care for, and they let you know what's available in your community. The number one priority of this helpline is to make sure we get you what you need near you. This isn't just about our programs and services. This is about all of the other organizations and agencies out there that can support you and the person that you care for. It is a confidential service, and it is not a crisis line. I just want to be really upfront about that. This is an information and referral source, right? If someone does call and they're having a really hard time, maybe it is more of an emergency situation, our specialists are trained to dispatch to emergency services or to ensure that you can get in touch with the crisis line near you. Now I'm just going to get into some of our key resources that I know a lot of caregivers have said that they find super helpful, whether they're new to caregiving or they are a more experienced caregiver. The I Am a Caregiver Toolkit is something that can really help you do a lot of what we talked about earlier. So in the earlier part of this session, we talked about doing an assessment in your personal life. Who do you have on your team? How are you coping? And so that can really help you work through some of those questions. And you may have seen this in your local newspaper a couple of months ago. We were able to get that out in a variety of newspapers. And again, it's just a way to really walk through a lot of the questions and the information that you want to document. What I find really helpful with this is that anyone who has been caring for someone knows that you've got people in your life sometimes who are so lovely and well-meaning, and they say, let me know if you need anything. That's really nice, but as a caregiver, it can be really hard to say, well, I do need help, but I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what to ask you for. And so as you start to take stock of what you do every day and what you're having the most trouble with, that's a really nice way to kind of say, okay, what can maybe I ask for support from others? Those people who have said, let me know if you need anything. Now that you get a good sense of what that actually looks like for you, it's a good chance to go back and say, this is what I actually really need. You offered help. Can you support, right? So sometimes we just need a way to really walk through this. I mentioned our website. So we do have a number of different tip sheets that we've put together. We've got some diagnosis specific content as well. So very specific conditions. We have resources for various groups. We have our COVID-19 resource center, of course. It's also where we really keep updated on any upcoming events, whether it's our events or other organizations as well that we think are really helpful for caregivers. We also have a Time to Talk podcast. We are moving into our second season, which is really exciting. So we have a number of experts that speak to various subject matters, as well as caregivers, with our host, Michelle Jobin. And you can find that podcast on any streaming service that makes them available. So some of our direct to caregiver programs and services, this gives you a sense of what that actually looks like. We're not in the business of duplicating services that already exist for caregivers across this province, but we do know that there are a number of gap areas. Sometimes caregivers can find really great supports for specific conditions or illnesses, but those organizations don't exist for every condition and illness, right? So that's kind of where we come in, where we can provide webinars. We have various topics each month that caregivers tell us are really important to them. Just to give you a sense of some topics that we cover, financial and legal tips, advanced care planning, various skills and development. And we always make sure that it's recorded and available on our website as well as YouTube. We also have e-learning, so everyone learns in different ways. Maybe you need more of an in-person, maybe virtual, or maybe you just want to learn on your own. So we do have our free courses for caregivers. You'll see on this screen some examples of what that looks like. One of our new ones is a roadmap to caregiving when it comes to the realities of mental illness and addictions and caregiving around that. We also ensure that we think about the relationship between caregivers and health professionals and how that can be a really successful relationship and how they can work together. So we have something on that, and as well as a caregiver one-on-one 101 for those who are, maybe newer to the caregiving role, but even those who are experienced are finding that to be quite rich for them as well. So I'll briefly just go through the rest of this here. So we do have another program that is very popular. It's called the SCALE program, and that stands for Support for Caregiver Awareness, Learning, and Empowerment. And this is an 8-week program, and you'll see the topics here. It's psychoeducational webinars, and we partner with an organization to make this happen. And there's also an option for individual counseling and group counseling through this program. We run it twice a year, but the webinars are always available throughout the year and they're recorded. But it really gives caregivers the opportunity to work through some of these major pieces and then have some backup, right, with that counseling option as well. The other thing that we offer is peer support. So we have peer support groups as well as one-to-one peer support program. And so it just depends on each individual's preference, of course. When it comes to our one-to-one peer support program, we have mentors who are caregivers themselves, and they wanted an opportunity to kind of give back to others, be in touch with other caregivers. So they are trained and equipped with various tools to assist others. And so what we normally try to do is match a caregiver based on their experience and what they're looking for out of the program with an appropriate mentor. And then the peer support groups are actually led by peers as well. And both of these have OCO staff backing them up to support. I mentioned earlier today too that we are seeing more and more caregivers under the age of 35 come forward and say, I'm a caregiver with various experiences. We actually developed a microsite specifically for young caregivers, usually under the age of 25, because on our current site, they weren't really finding it to be as relevant for them. And so they wanted a dedicated space where they could really talk through what it means for them as they're in school, as they're starting, just getting into the workforce and what that looks like balancing this as a young person. So that's another resource that we have as well. I mentioned that we do a lot of partnering with other organizations and agencies. This can be across the health system as well as community. So we do ensure that we're engaging care providers in all of our work, that we're taking caregiver insights forward so everyone can understand what that caregiver experience really looks like and what they need. And we do a variety of different learning opportunities with providers as well. So we ensure that we've got some e-learning and webinars available to them. And we also work with Ontario health teams to support their processes as they look at how they can best serve caregivers across their communities. And we do have a provider resource center as well. And again, a lot of this focuses on how we can support caregivers by supporting the care providers as well, right? Because as we know, those relationships are so incredibly important. If you're caring for someone in hospital, you need to have a good relationship with the care team there. And how can both parties really look at some strategies for that as an example? We also have our Time to Talk toolkit. This really is useful for staff. So in agencies or in the healthcare field, looking at ways that they can engage and support caregivers too. Because sometimes when we're dealing with a health issue of some kind, if you're working in the healthcare field, the caregiver is normally the person there, right, to give you more information and things like that. But sometimes we need to stop and say, well, how are you doing? Did you know that there's some resources to help you too as a caregiver? And so this is a way to try and help that conversation along. Privacy and consent is another key need that comes up a lot as well. As we know, health and privacy laws and rules are very complex. And so we also have a suite of resources, about 8 of them actually, to help inform and empower caregivers in this area as well. And then there's training and education for care providers available when it comes to this, just to ensure that the care recipient is getting what they need out of that as well. And I mentioned our insights and engagement that we do with caregivers on a regular basis. This happens in a lot of different ways. I mentioned our reports, the working groups, but we do a lot of co-design as well. And we ensure that we do collect caregiver insights through all of our programs, our services, and inform government and other system influencers as they build out their initiatives. We are not an advocacy organization, but we are able to take a lot of the insights and learning that we have and ensure that they're shared broadly for those who are our decision makers in the programs and services that are available. And I already talked through our public awareness, but we do announcements quite often, advertisements, things of that nature, just to really get the word out and hopefully people know that these supports are available to them. So thank you so much for listening. I know we have a few minutes for questions. If there are any questions or comments, you can also feel free to use the chat space there. But I also have my email if you prefer to reach out at a later date. And I know this recording will also be available along with the slides after today. So thank you so much. I hope you can take away some new information, some strategies that could be really helpful for you as a caregiver.